Yeah. Uh, Again, guys, thank you for joining me for the second part of our auction draft. So this time we're going to talk about Delhi Capitals. Delhi Capitals have let go of Jason Roy, Mohit Sharma, Sandeep Lamachane, Kimo Paul, Alex Carey. Firstly, I want to mention that last season, obviously, they struggled with the opening slot. Uh, Prithvi Shaw was out of form. Ajinkya Rahane filled in towards the end, but also did not create much of an impact. Is that something that Delhi Capitals will be looking at going into this auction? They have 12.9 CR to spend. So who is that player they should be looking at buying? I'll start with Nakul.
I'm not really sure what Delhi do at the top of the order because, in theory, they've got the answers already. Um, you've got Marcus Stoinis who can open if you need to. You've got Shimron Hetmeyer at the top of the order. You've got Rishabh Pant, who they used curiously last year. I think they were trying to get him to bat like somebody else for large parts of last year, and it didn't really work. Um, but the balance of that Delhi team is still off, but it's off in a way that isn't easily fixable. I don't think it's worth them trying to, for the money it would cost to try and get in a top quality, top order batter. I think they're better off going elsewhere and trusting the guys they've already got.
So then, where would they go? What would you look at buying if you are a Delhi Capitals, say, bidder? What would you go for?
You need someone in the middle order. You need someone in that 6 and 7 role who can provide you an all-round option, an all-round seam option, ideally, because you've got Akshar in there with the spin. But you need something, someone in that lower middle order who isn't just an insurance policy, but can actually be useful to you, whether your top order fires or not.
Mm-hmm. And Greg, so I'll ask you then, who should Delhi be looking at from that auction pool as like the key player they should circle out? That's the player we should be going for this auction.
Well, yeah, I think like Knuckles says, if they've got more or less the right players, they just need to get the right sum of the parts, really. I think their run to the final last year will help a lot with this season's campaign for them. I think they were one of the top sides in last year's campaign. I think the experience will help a lot. I think if we're looking for kind of a seam middle order batsman that can provide a couple of tight overs, we could look at someone like Shivam Dubey, perhaps, who's just been released from RCB. I never thought I'd be circling him in the draft, but he's obviously got international experience and could fill that kind of 6 or 7 slot and just provide a bit more balance to the side going forward. So he would be a name that I might be looking at, especially wouldn't take up any overseas cap as an Indian capped player.
Yeah, and you agree with that, Abhimanyu? Do you think that's what they should be looking at?
Yeah, actually, they do need someone in the middle order, but I would say someone like Maxwell or someone like Manas Labuschagne could do well for them because they do have Akshar Patel as a spinning option. They do have Ashwin. They do have there was Amit Mishra last year. I'm not sure if he's been retained. And he has. Okay. And they do have Rabada and Norje as a seamer option. So I don't think they need a seamer in the 11. They probably would do well with someone like Maxwell or Labuschagne.
I don't really see how Maxwell is he's such a tempting guy to have, but you've already got Hetmeyer, Stoinis, Norkia, and Rabada and that works well as a balance of 4 overseas players. Obviously, you need a backup, but you don't sign someone like Glenn Maxwell as a backup. I think that could be an expensive mistake.
I think maybe dropping Hetmeyer and playing Maxwell in place of him could do well for them.
Just to throw another name out there, if they are to play Rahane as a middle order batsman, which is where he usually bats at number 4, at the expense of Hetmeyer, can they go for Labuschagne or Steve Smith at the top of the order?
That's too many anchors. Arguably, Rahane is already too many anchors, but certainly Rahane and Smith. I mean, that's exactly what Rajasthan tried for a couple of years, and it didn't really work. I think you can maybe carry one, and weirdly, it seems to be Prithvi Shaw right now, in terms of someone who it doesn't have that kind of range of stroke that some have, but I think that would be way too conservative as an approach for Delhi, and not really in keeping with their mode as a franchise since they've relaunched as the Capitals. They've been about aggression, and they've been about fun and excitement. And I think they struggled when they went away from that at times last year, which all franchises do when they start losing. Basically, they start kind of going a bit too conservative. I think those options would be going away from what they're good at.
Greg, you also mentioned Shivam Dubey. Is Kedar Jadhav another option that could be looked at in the auction by Delhi in case they miss out on the Shivam Dubey because of their purse and because they could get outbid?
Yeah, I think so. You tend to see the all-rounders their price seems to get driven up as more as you would expect. But yeah, Kedar could fit in that middle order. But like you say, you've kind of got that. You got Shaw, Dhawan, Iyer, Pant, Stoinis, Hetmeyer in any order that you want to settle in with. So there's your kind of top six, and I would have thought Yadav would be somewhere in there, but maybe as a backup option. But like you say, the purse isn't massive, and I think the price that they would have to pay to get someone to squeeze in there might be too much for them in this kind of mini auction that we're looking at here.
And Nakul, I want to ask you, what about Pavan Negi? Is he someone, Delhi, I think before they had rebranded as Delhi Capitals, they paid about 13 crores, was it? Around that, there was a big amount they paid for Pavan Negi and it didn't quite work out. But is he someone that could be reunited with the Capitals franchise now?
I quite like Pavan Negi. I think he can be a useful sort of glue player in the playing 11. But given that you've already got Amit Mishra and Akshar Patel and Ashwin, I'm not sure that he really fits that mode. I mean, someone that you could look at if you wanted that is KM Gautam, who's been released by Kings 11. I think it's hard to see him having as bad a year as he did as last year. I think he can be very effective for someone, and he's someone who, unlike some of these other guys that we mentioned in terms of the batting all-rounders, can be truly devastating with I know I've used that word a few times already in some of these previews that we've done, but he is someone who can score very quickly at the death. So he might be an option. I mean, he's not a seam bowling all-rounder, but he is someone who could fill that slot if you wanted that extra explosive player down the bottom of the order.
Yeah, I'm surprised all of you mentioned so far utility man in the middle of the order, whereas just looking back at last season as a whole, Delhi did quite well to get to the final with the squad they have. But the problem was that opening slot, right? Where they just couldn't get that partner to Shikhar Dhawan. So I'm surprised that none of you have mentioned an Indian opener, for example, to go in. Is that the trust you have in the trust you have in Prithvi Shaw and Rahane to come good this season? Or is it just a gamble you take?
I think maybe that season was too bad for Prithvi Shaw, and I think he learned from his mistakes in Australia and before that in the UAE, and he will come back strong. And you do have Rahane as an option, and as Nakul said, there's Stoinis also who can open. So definitely they have a few opening pairs, and they could go with one of them, and they could still do well.
Greg?
Yeah, no, I think Abhimanyu says that's the option that we're looking at. One name I was interested in perhaps seeing was whether Alex Carey came back to Delhi, obviously with the Ricky Ponting link. He could be maybe an opening slot, but that would mean rejigging your overseas players. He's obviously gone really well in the Big Bash during this winter. Whether he fits in at the top, but again, it would be quite difficult to kind of rearrange that middle order. Maybe you'd leave Hetmeyer out if Stoinis is bowling again this campaign. But he might be a name that they might be able to get slightly cheaper than other bigger name overseas players.
If you're talking about overseas or middle order batsmen, if Hetmeyer has to drop out, what about the world number 1 T20 batsman in the world, David Malan? Is he someone Delhi Capitals could be looking at as that person to replace Hetmeyer in that top 4?
Milan would be expensive. He's gone in with a pretty high base price. He's a fine player, but he's one of these players a little bit like Chris Jordan, who's done a lot better for England than he ever has done at domestic T20 level, barring one incredible season for Middlesex in the Blast. I think last year or maybe the year before. He is, again, someone who takes a little bit of time to get going. The famous thing every time he plays for England is that, he's 15 off 15 balls, regardless of how the rest of the innings goes. Now, normally he is perfectly capable of catching up, batting at number 3. But I don't think he's the right profile of player, even though he is extremely talented.
So then last question before we wrap up on Delhi. If you're again at the auction at the Delhi table, who's that one player you'll circle out and go for?
I would still say Maxwell.
Maxwell. What about you, Greg?
Surprising myself, but I would take Shivam Dubé. I never thought I would say that.
What about you, Nakul?
I would agree with Greg. I'd also go Shivam Dubé to fill that little slot and back your strengths and then try and sort of be smart and fill your gaps rather than trying to buy another really expensive option where you're already strong.
So the question I have on Shivam Dubé, and obviously since both of you mentioned Shivam Dubé, it's to you both. Do you guys think he's proven enough in the IPL games he's played so far to be that one person that Delhi can rely on to, close that little jigsaw of theirs?
I'm hoping that Stoinis will be able to bowl a couple of overs, and then you've obviously got Akshar Patel, Ashwin, Rabada, and Nokia as well, and then another bowler if you want to kind of get your 20 overs in. But I think the balance that he would bring to the side would be kind of the number one reason for going after him in the auction.
Yeah, he'd give you an option on some of the quicker pitches like Eden Gardens, like the Wankhede, and like Mohali, if you wanted them. And then I think primarily, as much as anything, he's a batting option, and if you need him, he's a useful batting option. He's one of these guys who doesn't look like he should be able to hit the ball off the square, but he's got such long levers that if he gets it anywhere near the middle, it'll clear the rope, which he's shown intermittently in the few games he got for India. And he's one of these guys who I think you can rely on if you need him, but you might not need him all the time.
Okay. So thank you guys for joining me on the second part of this auction. We'll have to wait and find out who Delhi go for and see which one of you is right in the auction.